I'm Karl Konrad and welcome to our weekly edition of Australian Immigration News. We are the only channel that analyses what is going on in the world of Australian immigration. We certainly don't just parrot what the Immigration Department releases. Not only do we analyse law changes and policy releases, we also dig around each week for stories regarding immigration and how they are influencing the migration debate. It takes a lot of time, but I enjoy ruffling the feathers of the establishment, of course, only when they need to be ruffled. As most of you in Australia watching know, the media is full of stories about how we have too many international students coming to live here. Statistics like these are often paraded out. This table produced by the Department of Education just before Christmas on data compiled by the Bureau of Statistics demonstrate the high number of 657,150 international students arriving up until October 2023. It is interesting to note, however, we are still more than 100,000 less than the numbers that arrived in 2019 for the same period, and nobody then was complaining we had too many international students coming. However, what the media is really failing to disclose is that these numbers also include the students who leave for a while and then return. According to the additional information on the department's website, it says, the student visa arrivals figures in the chart and table above represent the number of movement of travellers with a student visa rather than the number of travellers. Individuals who travel multiple times in a year on a student visa are counted each time they cross Australian borders. Isn't it likely that many students who have been stuck in Australia during the pandemic in the middle of their course perhaps missed seeing their family? Isn't it also likely that many travelled home once flying again normalised? This graph also helps to explain the real picture. You can see that the peak arrival times happen in January to February and between June and July. These months also correlate to the holiday periods for most higher education providers and TAFE vocational colleges. This whole media frenzy of too many students arriving includes all those travelling on holidays, so in reality this total figure should not be used as a weapon to blame students for the housing crisis. For all we know, the actual number of new arrivals could easily be more than 100,000 less. It would be nice though if the government could give us a real figure on the actual international students arriving into this country for their first time. Now, are Indian students discriminated against in their student visa applications? That is what many people in the international student industry are asking themselves after the government data showed that 90% of Indian student visa applications were refused last year for those looking to study vocational courses. 41.1% were refused for higher education studies. In the Sydney Morning Herald, it was reported that the Home Affairs Department claimed that this high percentage was caused by the presentation of fraudulent documentation and information has led to higher visa refusal rates and longer processing times for some cohorts, including vet centre applications from Indian nationals. A key requirement for successful applicants was being a genuine student. So, according to Doha, the large majority, 90% of international students, were likely not refused based upon any fraudulent document discovery by the Immigration Department. Rather, they were assessed as being non-genuine students by using the Genuine Temporary Entrant Test, known as the GTE. In reality, though, let's call out the GT for what it is. It must be the most misused ministerial direction that ever existed. It is responsible for undermining the integrity of the migration system like no other guideline in my last 26 years of practice. It teaches visa applicants that in order to have any chance of visa granted, you have to lie to the Immigration Department to get your visa. In reality, if the GTE was used objectively upon all visa applicants on a non-discriminatory basis, most international students would be refused their visa applications. If you have never seen the requirements of the GTE, then take a look yourselves and you will discover that many of its components could be applied to any international students. The GTE undermines Australia's credibility, and worse still, teaches visa applicants that if they lie and tell the government what they want to hear, then they can use this tactic again in future visa applications. If the government wants to reduce visa grants, then just tell the world we're going to have a cap on the numbers so potential applicants can make a judgment themselves, not to waste their money by giving it to the Australian government. Using the GTE unfairly and then keeping application fees really is just a fraudulent act in itself. When the Labor government came into power, they made noises about their concerns about using this GTE. Now they understand it is their only tool they can use to cap student numbers and then turn around to blame the visa applicants themselves for their own failure. We will endeavour to look into how much money the Immigration Department has made from all these student visa refusal applications. And speaking of money, we were rather shocked when we read this article in the Sydney Morning Herald regarding how much the University of Sydney was making off international students. Of the total number of students enrolled at the University of Sydney, 44% of them were international students. Will it still be regarded as an Australian university when that figure crosses 50%? I have to wonder. According to the article, international students accounted for a whopping 78% of the university's student fee revenue in 2022 and 48% of the institution's total revenue. It makes more money from foreign students than any other university in the country, at more than $1.4 billion in fees last year. But what really blew us away in the office here was this graph showing the rise of revenue in the last few years, despite the pandemic getting in the way. Even during the pandemic, they were increasing their revenue by tens of millions of dollars. So is there a planned cap on the percentage of international students compared to Australian students? One has to wonder if money means everything. Now that 2024 has begun and all the politicians are on holiday, it's a good opportunity to look at what's happening around the world in terms of migration patterns and how that compares to us. As far as large Western countries go, Australia has one of the highest percentage of immigrants as a share of the total population at around 30%. New Zealand is at 28%, Canada is at 21%, then the US is at 15% and the UK at 14%. Despite Japan's shrinking population figures and the reality that 30% of the population is over 65 and 1 in 10 is over 80, they are determined to keep a low immigration rate of just 2% and thus are at the bottom of the list. Whilst Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom are planning to reduce their migration intake, Canada is the only country actively seeking to maintain a relatively high level. However, by their standards, they are reining in the number of temporary workers coming into Canada, citing, like Australia, a rental market crisis. Still, their targets seem very high compared to Australia.
To maintain its target of welcoming 485,000 new permanent residents in 2024 and 500,000 in 2025. Starting in 2026, the number of newcomers we aim to welcome will stabilize at 500,000, allowing for a sustainable population growth.
The Canadian Immigration Minister went on to explain why there is such a need for so many immigrants.
Our worker to retiree ratio has dropped from 7 to 1 since I was born 50 years ago to nearly 3 to 1 now. If we don't welcome more newcomers, that number will approach 2 to 1 in the decades ahead, and that'll put our infrastructure and key programs like our healthcare and our education at risk.
In addition, it's interesting to note that Canada is also developing a path for the undocumented workers living there to gain permanent residency. It seems like Australia and Canada are on different planets. In Australia, professionals like myself are still arguing with the government to give the temporary resident parents of Australian citizen children a pathway to permanent residency. It's such a basic right for Australian citizen children, but the government remains unmotivated to do anything. In Australia, you have to fight like hell just to get the government to recognise basic compassion in their decision-making process. Here are a few examples of what not to do if you're the Immigration Department. Don't threaten current international students who are already in Australia that if they are over 35, they won't have access to the 485 graduate visa from the middle of this year. Don't cap and cease 476 visa applicants who have been waiting for their visas to be processed in good faith and then just offer them refunds. And don't limit the number of Australian partner visas that are granted every financial year. The Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, who wants to stand up and take credit for immigration issues, seems devoid of compassion on very basic decision-making policy. Perhaps she should take a trip over to Canada to see how it's done. Now let's look at what the UK has been doing lately. They too are struggling with their high migration intake and are taking the following steps to get it under control. They have increased the minimum salary for the working visa from £26,000 to £38,700, very similar to what Australia has also done. They are also looking at reducing their student visa intake by granting student visas to the primary applicants only. No dependents are permitted. Considering Australia, though, is a big lonely island, any similar move here to do the same would seem overly harsh. The UK is even going further by not allowing students permission to work whilst they're studying and limiting the working visa granted to them afterwards, similar to our 485 visa. Our students don't need to worry because working here is seen as crucial to prop up the employment shortages. The poor old palm visa scheme seems to be getting on the nose with many farmers looking to leave the visa process due to being forced to guarantee visa holders at least 30 hours work every week. The farmers want this 30 hours per week to be averaged over a period of weeks, but the unions have demanded otherwise. It seems the farmers want workers more on a casual model, so if it's raining and people cannot work, they don't want to pay. It seems that this visa is heading for the rocks soon enough, unless the migration strategy has some plan to save it. And finally, remember last year when the government promoted a scheme to train locals to be the next generation of clean energy technicians? In January 23, the federal government was happy to talk about how they were funding 10,000 places for those willing to take up apprentices in the clean energy sector. However, according to an article in The Australian, only 1,787 participants have so far signed up. Sadly, it reflects the reality these days that young people in Australia shy away from trade occupations where they have to get their hands dirty. Sure, money has something to do with it, but most aspired for office jobs and now working from home. It looks like the government will have no chance to meet the electrician target needed to keep us all powered up in the future. It seems it won't be long before electricians are on the priority occupation list for skilled visas. Well, that's all for a busy start to the year. Things are going to warm up in the world of Australian immigration soon, so you have found the right place to ensure you keep up to date with what's going on. Remember, if people need professional advice, we are always here to help. You can book a consultation by checking out the available times on our website, but if you need to talk sooner, call Pat or Hay, two delightful real people who can try and arrange an earlier urgent time for you. And don't forget to support what we do here by pressing that like icon, sharing this video, and subscribing if you haven't done so already. As always, take care out there, and I will see you next time. So bye for now.